All right, so here's a new arrival. Decided I wanted to learn a little more about the 395 and but not to buy anything new. Get something used but not too old. This is a 2019 production saw, made in Brazil, although these are also made in North America, or at least sold in North America still, even though this saw has been around for a while. And it's been well used. There's obvious use marks on it. See, we've got, gonna have to somehow block, otherwise replace the starter assembly. It's not the worst thing in the world, but there is a bit of a safety hazard there. The handles has seen better days. Still a functional clutch cover, but it does have a crack right here. It's missing the dogs on the clutch, but I do have the dog for the inside. Otherwise, it's in fairly respectable shape. I haven't dug into it yet, so this will be a little bit of a project saw. And you can see the muffler has seen better days, although very likely still usable. We'll just have to dig into it and see what we can make of it. But otherwise, it seems to be in fairly decent shape. Might be able to salvage some of the parts from the clutch cover. I'm probably going to replace that. Probably don't need to replace the top cover, but we'll see what it looks like on the inside. And but generally speaking, I think this will be a usable saw. Supposedly it does run. However, I'm going to tear into it and replace some parts before I try firing it up. I may put on a better breathing muffler. Might, as I said, replace the starter assembly, but I won't do that until after I get it fired up and ensure that it's working well. I probably will pull off the intake. Obviously be pulling off the muffler to look at the cylinder. So I might show some of that and see how I can assess the condition of this saw. But I believe this saw came from Pennsylvania. I bought it off eBay for a fairly decent price, $400 some odd. They retail for a good $1,400. And so with a little investment, I should have nearly a new saw. Hopefully I won't have to rebuild the top end, but even if I have to do that, I'll still be money ahead compared to buying a new saw. But I'm expecting there to be some replacements that are going to be necessary, because this saw was clearly very heavily used by a commercial outfit, either for firewood or for production logging. So, all right, so taking off the clutch cover, done a little bit of cleanup here. Actually took off the guide plate. This was definitely a well-used saw. You never get a work saw that doesn't get some abuse. The chain tensioner is fine. The bar nuts are fine. AV mounts appear fine. I actually looked in the underneath the crankcase and on the fuel tank, and it's pretty clean underneath there, considering that this was a well-used work saw. Not too bad. Not sure yet whether I will need to replace springs or even need to replace the clutch. I got to take some measurements on that, but nothing's obviously broken there on the clutch. I don't see immediate issues on the oiler just from outward appearances, but I won't know until I dig into that. So far, so good. However, the one issue, and I'm kind of a little worried about the condition of the top end, is that so this saw was not maintained on a routine basis. I mean, that is the condition of the air filter. There's really not much excuse for that. So the carb box, underneath the cylinder, I'm sure is pretty manky. And when you get a saw like that, I kind of question whether it's running real well. If you look at the top of the spark plug there. Either there was a lot of crap getting in there and it started to corrode, or it's just kind of like it's never been replaced. So we're absolutely not going to run this saw until we at least do a lot of cleanup, replace the air filter. So yeah, that's what we're into so far. All right, I don't know if you can see, but right there, you see all that rough material, top of the inside of the air filter. So it's pretty clear that fines were getting in there. If we look at the top of the air filter holder here, you can see that maybe you can't see. Let's try and get some light on the subject there. You might be able to tell that there are some fines down in there. It's not crazy terrible, but it's bad enough. So there's a, and here's a, there's your carburetor, folks, carb box. Yeah, that's pretty bad. So this saw, the cover never came off. It was never cleaned. The air filter practically never came off. I'm guessing, despite it indicating, the seller indicating that it was a runner with lots of compression, I'm guessing, you know, either things were running poorly because of airflow, or there may well be some scoring in the cylinder. I'm expecting some issues, just because it's clear that there was some material getting through. Saw was never cleaned. You can see spark plugs never been changed. You know, all's not lost. Hopefully the carburetor is still, you know, salvageable, and all the other little bits. It's only a 4-year-old saw. So we're still going to be in good shape, but that's why I didn't pay more than around $450 for this saw, because knowing that there would very likely be a lot of work to do, because it was a work saw. But there are some indications, like underneath the handle assembly, that suggest that while it may have been a work saw, it may not have been used as much as you might think, just because we would expect to have a lot of gunk, as we're seeing in the carb box, on, you know, the rest of the saw, but particularly underneath the handle assembly there. So I guess we won't know till we dig in it some more. So there's an update on the 395 project saw. All right, better look now at the inside of the assembly of this saw. So yeah, crazy dirty. Not terrible on the cylinder itself, and we can definitely clean it up. I'll bet the decomp has never been replaced. Sure doesn't look like it. Okay. And if you look right down here by the intake assembly, there could be a little of a gap there. There may have been an air leak. It's hard to say. So, but wow, is there going to be some effort involved to clean up that carb. So we're going to have to seal up the air intake and get some serious air pressure behind here and try and get off a lot of the coarse gunk before we proceed a whole lot further with opening up the intake. So I'll probably open up a few other things. Right now I do have the choke closed so that it'll minimize some of the material getting in there, but I'm going to probably put on a new filter just as a barrier, or maybe some plastic with a rubber band. So yeah, if she is running, can't be running that good, and if she is, probably would have been limited life left. So she just needs a good cleanup. Maybe we won't have to replace the top end. Let's hope so. All right, so I've already taken off the end of the negative lead there. it goes behind the positive, which is the spark plug wire, back around then through and clips in to the shroud around the flywheel. There, there, and then goes up underneath the carb adjustment boot there. And you can see how the spark plug wire fits in this little channel. You see they didn't have it seated in there correctly for a while and it was rubbing. So that's a potential bad deal. Hopefully I won't have to replace that. Goes behind the shroud and then up underneath this rail in the crankcase and then up and over in front of this little air intake sleeve. All right, you can see that we were able to remove the shroud there and basically keeping the wires in place. I just loosened the lead right over here, so I had a little bit of slack. And so you can kind of see how things work here. Always a good idea to take some video or photos if it's the first time you're rebuilding a particular model of saw, just so that you can put all the bits back the way they need to go. So you can see in here that I have started to remove some of the gunk, and you know, I think just because this saw hasn't been very well maintained, you know, I'm going to go ahead and probably take the flywheel off. If the operator had spent at least once a week, I like to do it after every day, had just used compressed air to clean the saw, there's a chance that some of the material that built up in here, you know, could have been prevented from building up. This all makes the saw run hotter and can cause other issues. But I would say that in general, this is not even close to the worst I've seen a saw. I wouldn't characterize it as a turd saw, other than, you know, that leaves some room to be desired there. And there's just no excuse, in my opinion, for having a carb box that's in that kind of condition. But anyway, this is a gunky enough saw where I think I feel compelled to kind of take everything down. If the cylinder and piston are okay on the inside, we're just gonna go with things the way they are. We'll also, the other incentive that I have of taking the flywheel and the clutch and oiler off is to get a look, see whether there may have been some bypassing and or what kind of shape the crank bearings are in. You know, I'm hoping I don't have to break the whole saw open and replace the crank and the crank bearings. You know, but a saw that's been used like this and abused, I should at least be replacing the crank seals, and that requires all those bits to come off anyway. So basically we're going to be into a rebuild of this saw, not a complete rebuild, hopefully. But it's going to be some effort, but you know, generally speaking, nothing more than a few days work if we don't have to replace the top end. All right, so this shroud was in really good shape. We'll be able to reuse it. There's no cracks whatsoever, and it wasn't even that dirty. Goes to show how good a design this type of concept is for keeping things relatively clean around the flywheel. And when saw manufacturers went around and included these, well, I'll just call it an air shunt or an air pipe, those provide air to the carb box, but also somewhat, you know, keep things a little bit clean. However, to operate or work correctly, the saw needs to be clean. If this area of the saw gets overly dirty, then it doesn't perform as well. And, you know, can lead to that. Although fines can get in there in other ways if the box isn't sealed real well and working in really dusty environment. And it does look like those, you know, it's just hard to know for sure, but there's fairly fine sawdust there, so whether they were working with a dull chain, don't know if this may have been used as a mill saw. It's just hard to know. But another thing to point out is that these bolts here, and there for the cylinder case, it's not the air filter box, but the main cylinder cover itself. One of those, two of them were in there really well, really tight, and actually started to corrode a little bit. Both on the outside were rusting, and then on the inside, particularly this one right here, you can see it was actually starting to corrode a little bit. I'll have to clean that up, but that just, you know, corroborates that this operator just never bothered doing routine cleaning and routine maintenance of the saw, which is, you know, unfortunate. Hopefully everything is fine and I can just clean things up and there wasn't any real damage to the saw. It's just hard to know at this point, but so far most of the parts and bits I'm seeing are probably going to be reusable, and I'm only going to replacing stuff if I see undue wear or other indicators of cause of concern. All right, so there's the inside of the spark plug boot. And there's the spark plug. I've already cleaned it a little. Also notice there's some wear here. It's not down to bare wire. But again, this is all indication that the operator just never cleaned anything, never even checked anything. I would not trust that for good quality contact at all. So I'm either going to have to clean this up, which I think I could reuse this and maybe tape this to buffer it a little bit, you know, or I'll just replace the spark plug boot completely. It is a little bit of a pain to install the spark plug boot, so if I can get some cleaner in there and scuff up that spark plug cap a little bit, then I'll probably try and do that. Of course, you always want to test for spark, but so yeah, onward. All right, we're back on the 395 build. Just a few thoughts here. Nothing terribly interesting probably for most of you, but so this is a pretty heavy duty part. I don't know if I'm going to try and put a mesh over that just to keep real coarse bits from getting in the air intake or the flywheel intake, but you know, this was actually in pretty good condition. There wasn't much cleanup left. You might be able to tell after the cleanup that it was really dirtiest right here. You know, that's right over here by the oiler, and this is where most of the gunk on the saw, on the flywheel side of the saw, had accumulated, and that's basically because the operator being relatively lazy when it comes to filling oil through the oil cap. And, you know, not to be overly critical, I mean, we've all been there and done that, and we all, human nature is to be fairly lazy, but the more accurate you can be at filling your oil tank, and don't rush it if you have to. Clean things up before you get operating again, but it's real common then for oil to get down into the flywheel area, and you want this as clean as possible in here because you're feeding air into the carb box, and you could be feeding oil, and in fact that's probably one thing that contributed to, you know, some of the issues back in here. So yeah, anyway, another just quick comment, random thought is, you know, so considering that this is only a 4-year-old saw, I guess that's understandable why this wasn't in too bad a shape. But considering it did require a fair amount of cleanup with only, you know, less than 4 years of use, you know, it just goes to show you how important it is for operators to try and take care of your saws. If you do take care of your saws, if you do maintenance on saws, if you repair and rebuild saws, you understand how, you know, a little ounce of prevention is worth a pound of pain. But if you don't do a lot of work on saws and you're considering maintaining your own saws, you know, pay heed to the recommendations in your owner's manual and some of the things that I may say or that others that maintain saws. You know, it's really going to pay off down the road for you if you take good care of your saw. And I got to believe that this operator, just assuming that he didn't like the way the saw was operating and it was getting too dirty for him and all that, and just didn't want to invest the time, he wouldn't have had to done that at all if he had just taken care of the saw. These are great saws. Another thought I just wanted to pass along is that this generation of saws, really easy actually to work on compared to the generation 5. The 4s aren't bad, but those really aren't pro saws. But the 200, 300 series and some of the 500s are your pro saws. I really like the 2 and 300 series. They're just really easy to work on. And this 395 is you know, not much different at all from a 394, which is really part of the 200 generation saws. And there's a lot of similarities between that and, say, the 281s, 288s. And in fact, all of the service parts or service tools, a good portion, I'd say 95% of the service tools that I use for working on a 281, 288 are the same ones that I can use on a 294 and a 295. Interestingly enough, I find it exceedingly difficult to find any workshop service manual for a 395, and I think that's because they never made it. I think this is really a 394 that's been, you know, upgraded over time, and generally speaking, there's you can use the information you find in the 394 manual for servicing this particular saw. So just a few thoughts there. You can see that there was a crack on the gas cap and I could smell a little bit of the old fuel residue, so I did put a flippy cap on this. Probably will do the same thing on the oil tank. Not sure when I'm going to take the handle off here, probably not too long, but probably going to remove the flywheel here next. And probably get the muffler off to take a look at the cylinder here to kind of know what I'm going to be in for before I, you know, actually start dinging it in to this whole thing right here. So at any rate, I'm kind of excited about working on this saw. It's other than being dirty, it seems to be in pretty darn good shape, and I have a lot of familiarity with this coming from the 200 series generation saws. So till next time.